A positive interval describes where the function is positive. This means where is your graph above the x-axis? A negative interval describes where the function is negative, and this means where's your graph below the x-axis? Because we're focusing on where it's above or below the x-axis, x-intercepts are really going to help us write these. So when we look here, to find our positive interval, we want to find our x-intercepts. That's at -1, 0, and 3, 0. Everything that's positive is the part of your graph that's above the x-axis. So that's this piece over here and this piece right here. So the way we can write that is from -infinity to -1, and then from 3 to infinity. Again, we're already saying like, hey, all of your y values are positive. Where? Between -infinity and -1. That's why we don't have to worry about writing in the actual y values. We are saying literally between x values of 3 and infinity, your y values are positive. This means when we write a negative interval, we want to say, where are your y values negative? Well, that's where your graph is below the x-axis because the x-axis is y equals 0. If you're below y equals 0, your y is less than 0, which is a negative number, right? And so we find our x-intercepts and we say your y values are negative everywhere between these x-intercepts, so between -1 and 3. And so that's how we write it. Notice that we're not including the -1 or 3, and that's because if we included it, we'd be saying that your y values are negative between -1 and 3 inclusive. But at -1, your y value is 0. 0 is not a negative number, and that is why we have to make sure we put a less than symbol here. So for this example, we want to try to find our x-intercepts, but we don't have any. So that means that everything is negative, and so nothing is positive. And so you don't have a positive interval, and that's okay. Over here, we look at our graph, everything's negative. So that means all inputs, right? So between -infinity and infinity, your y values are going to be negative. For this example, we have two x-intercepts at 1, 0, and 5, 0. So the positive interval is between 1 and 5. So we write that 1 is less than x is less than 5. And again, we don't include the 1 or 5 because if we included them, we'd be saying that your y value is positive there, but 0 is not positive. For your negative interval, we're going to look at where your graph is below the x-axis. So in blue, I circled the two pieces that are negative, and notice that this is a different case, right? Like right here, we have this closed circle that doesn't continue on. So that means that one of our intervals is going to have a less than or equal symbol because this y value is definitely negative, and that occurs at x equals -2. So your first negative interval is from -2 to 1, and we include the -2. And then over here, we have from 5 on is where your y value is negative, so from 5 to infinity. So from -2, less than or equal to x, less than 1, and then from 5 to infinity because your y values are negative. So again, we include the -2 with the less than or equal symbol because at x equals -2, your y value is negative. However, when x is 1, your y value is 0, which is not negative, and so it should not be included. All right, let's look at another example. I marked the x-intercept in blue, and so at this x-intercept, on the left of it, we have a positive piece, and on the right of it, we have a positive piece. So in this case, we have two positive intervals, from -4 to -3, and then from -3 to 0. Notice that we don't include the -3 because that's where your y value is 0, and we can't do that. However, we don't have a negative interval, and that's okay too. So we've seen a case where you have like all positive or all negative, and here we have everything but one number is going to give us a positive interval. So here, since your graph never goes below the x-axis, you have no negative interval. Over here, our positive interval is from 0 to infinity because that's where your graph is above the x-axis. This is a problem about estimated manufacturing costs of manufacturing X items. So we're not going to go beyond X equals 0 to the left, right? Like we're not going to manufacture less than 0 items. And we're going to assume that this continues on. Even though it's not realistic to manufacture an infinite amount of items, we don't have enough information to know when that cutoff is. And for our negative interval, we don't have any because we aren't going to go into debt, right? We're not going to have to manufacture, our manufacturing costs are not going to be less than 0. And so that's why there's no negative interval. So remember with positive and negative intervals, that's describing where your function is either positive or negative. You can use your x-intercepts to help you write these, and you're looking for where are your y values above or below the x-axis. And when you write the inequality, you're going to say between these two x values, my y values are positive, or between these two x values, your y values are negative.